Good afternoon, this is Jeff with Sewer Tech Northwest. We're at property address 6436 Southeast Morrison Street here in Portland. Located inside the garage, and I describe everything as if you're standing in the street facing the front of the home. So from that orientation right now, we are at the front left corner of the garage here. You've got a 4-inch cast iron cleanout. The other smaller cleanout that's adjacent to it is indicative of a storm system cleanout. These older homes, this is a very normal setup. You often have this on the outside of the house on most homes, but you will get this inside, especially with this type of house layout. So anyway, and what you often have there is a tie-in that happens almost immediately upon access, which is very typical. Anyhow, we're going to go and Y into the side of the pipe here. So in this case, the cleanout does not actually sit directly over top the sewer line. It actually, the line is coming under the driveway, or I'm sorry, the garage floor just a couple feet away from the cleanout. Whereas most cleanouts tie in vertically into the top of the pipe, this one Ys in horizontally. Transitioning here over to 4-inch ABS pipe. At least it appears to be. We're going to give this a good look over as we come back in. There's some texture and look to this. It is looking almost more like Orangeburg right now. We shall see here in just a moment. I'm not actually sure that's ABS plastic. That odd texture in the flow line is not terribly indicative of what. And I guess theoretically it could be cast iron that's had a coating put inside of it, an epoxy coating or something. We'll take a second look at that here in a moment. Transitioning to 6-inch concrete pipe now. We have root pen. I can't tell what we've got here. We'll get a nicer view of some of this stuff once the line's cleared out at the end. All right, now into 3034 PVC. Now this PVC pipe is spotless clean. Crazy clean. And there's the main there at about 42 feet. It's a very short sewer line. In this part of town, your responsibility is up to the face of the curb. Oh yeah, we're going to go locate really quick here while the pipe drains out. In fact, what we're going to do, just the PVC is in such good condition and so spotless. I don't even need the line drained out to look at that stuff. It is immaculate. And most, if not all, of that green pipe there is in the city's responsibility. The city's updated their end of the sewer line at this point. Yeah, we're going to locate here. This will tell us how much of this older pipe is on property and also just verify where the line is heading to. Alright, so we're currently located right now. The line orients kind of the left side edge of the driveway as it makes its way out to the road. You've even got a green plastic curb stamp. In this case, it's in the driveway skirt, but in line with the curb. You'll see a little green plastic circle there hammered into the concrete. That's a marker for where the sewer line crosses into the street. I'm pleased to see that this joint looks like it is held up. It's parked very close to a tree. Those transition joints there are by far the weakest joint in your line to a root intrusion, especially when you have new and old pipe meeting up with each other. Yeah, you've definitely got, looks like a root intrusion punching through right there. Carpet roots is what we call those, where they build up in a layer in the flow line. Anyway, I will certainly recommend a fix on that. The line is so darn clean, I'm almost curious if this thing was jetted recently. I mean, it's like freaky clean. It's very uncommon. I mean, not that there aren't homeowners out there that live that clean. It's very unusual to see it. I mean, there's like zero signs of life. This is the pipe material that's got me a little bit puzzled. The texture of it, it almost looks like it could be newer cast iron. There's a part of me that it leans almost towards looking like Orangeburg. Typically, Orangeburg is a little bit, yeah, it's kind of got an oval shape to it. That may very well be Orangeburg. This is a hard one. typically when you see this stuff, oh, my foot counter reset for some odd reason. I wonder why it wasn't counting back. The edge on that joint there looks much more like cast iron, or the reason it's confusing is you can see this is what cast iron typically looks like right here. Rusty red, bonehead obvious what it is. This stuff is giving me a run for my money. There's some characteristics about it that look, so if you see how my camera's kind of going over a lump right now, there's a little bit of a deformation there. It's not perfectly round. That's what's making me think that this is potentially Orangeburg. And Orangeburg is a tar paper sewer line. That right there, there's the lump in the flow line. That's what I was looking for. So this does appear to be Orangeburg tar paper sewer. This is a pretty good example. In fact, it's an incredibly good looking example of what Orangeburg. Normally when I find this stuff, it's crushed down to the point where my camera can barely fit through it. You've got some striations in the flow line there that almost look like there may have been roots there at some point. If you see those kind of odd looking lines in the flow line, where there may have been roots there or still potentially are roots, that I don't know what else would create that texture. Like roots settled down into the pipe. It's very odd. But that deformation of the flow line is one of the giveaways. The other thing that gives it away is the odd white staining at the top of the pipe, which is indicative to Orangeburg. I've been doing this 13 years. I've cambered almost 25,000 sewer lines. Orangeburg sometimes can look similar to ABS, but ABS does not develop that odd white staining at the top of the pipe. It is something that is unique to Orangeburg. The other thing that gives it away is the lumps in the flow line. This stuff is held up better than the average Orangeburg. It is a banned pipe product. The production of it was banned in the late 50s, early 60s because of its very, very high rate of failure, even back then when it was newer install. Most of the time you find this stuff, I can barely get the camera through it because it's been crushed down to the point where it's got maybe 1 or 2 inches of diameter left. So those odd striations in the flow line there, it could just be something natural to this pipe material in this circumstance. The way that's displayed there, it's like there's roots, but you've subtracted the roots from the equation. Like roots were there and they settled their way into the pipe material, and it's very malleable, so that does happen. The cleanliness of this line makes me think it got jetted and cleaned out. I may be wrong, but it is so freakishly clean that's kind of what I'm leaning towards. It's hard to say though. Anyway, being that there is a root intrusion in the flow line, what I would recommend in this circumstance, I would not recommend a spot repair, not on a line this age. What I would recommend here is shooting an epoxy liner through this. I mean, you could dig it up, you could do whatever you want with it, but I would highly recommend looking into an epoxy liner. The Orangeburg pipe here has enough roundness to it and good enough flow that I don't see any reason why you need to go tearing it out of the ground. You could shoot a liner through it. You're going to have a little bit of a lumpy, bumpy nature to it. But as it sits right now, that on its own is not doing anything to affect functionality. So, and a lot of times with that high pressure air system, when they blow those liners out, they often can smooth out some of these blisters. What causes that is it's layers of cardboard with tar in between it. That's what Orangeburg is made out of. As you can imagine, it's not a great sounding pipe product, and it's not generally. Those layers, they start to delaminate as moisture intrudes through them, and it starts to puff you'll get blisters that form. And so that's typically what creates that lump in the flow line. You can also get it'll deform around anything. If roots grow underneath it, it'll deform over the top of them, but typically it's blisters from moisture intruding into the pipe material, and it puffs it up. So anyway, this is not one where I would just spot repair it. The line is too old in my opinion to go messing around with stuff like that. I would be shooting a liner in this thing, from end to end here, at least from the Orangeburg out to the end of the concrete pipe. And what you want to do, it's not going to change the cost really any at all. You want to take that liner just barely past the transition joint, maybe a foot or so, overlap the joint to seal it up. is the likelihood you're going to get a root intrusion through that transition from concrete to PVC is very, very high. It may not happen now or a year from now. I can just about guarantee it's going to happen at some point. It is such a common thing that occurs especially in this part of town, those transitions right at the curb near trees. It's something I can all but guarantee will happen at some point. So you might as well, it might cost an extra $100 to run that liner at that point. I would highly recommend doing it. It doesn't guarantee roots won't get through. It makes it much harder for them to get through because you've now overlapped a joint. But what you're also doing is helping to guarantee that if roots do plow through that joint at some point, you're ensuring that it does it into city responsibility and not in homeowner territory. It makes it their problem, not yours. All right, so we're just a little bit outside the garage, I don't know, 5 feet or so. My foot counter's, again, it's reset, something glitched it out. I can go back and review the original run out there and put that on the report. So I marked that with a green T marking indicating the transition. You're at 2 feet deep, very shallow. And then I'll mark this independently with a green X. So the X marks the roots. The rest of the markings are just basically indicating where the line is at. All right, and there's so much, the ground is just absolutely plastered with leaves and whatnot right now. I would need a flat nose shovel to scrape them all free so I could paint the concrete. So anyway, I put a few markings down at the transition from cast iron to Orangeburg where the root is at, and then also right about where the street edge is. And based on that locate, I got the street edge. It looks like they may have taken that update just past the curb. So it may be there. Either way, I think it's still worthwhile extending the liner just past that point to overlap the joint. Whether it happens in city territory or not, it helps to reduce the risk because you've now put an added layer in front of that joint. It's one more thing those roots have to try and get through if they're going to try and get to the joint. It just ensures that you help prevent the likelihood of a root intrusion leading to a problem. So again, being that you've got the age the line is, and if you notice how those kind of odd striations there, in fact, you can see it looks like there's little hairs there. If you look at what that looks like relative to what these roots look like, the way that they're growing, that kind of carpet mat type root, it looks identical to it. It kind of looks like the roots got subtracted from the equation. So, and that's one of the things that concerns me is if this line was jetted recently, is what does it actually look like when the line's been sitting here for a year or two? Is there roots throughout the entire sewer line? And I have a sneaking suspicion there might be. Either way, with just the root intrusion alone, combined with the fact you've got Orangeburg pipe in here that's running right along next to a whole bunch of bushes along the driveway, it would not surprise me one bit if there were roots growing throughout this whole thing at one point. All those things put together, combined with the age, a line this age does not make sense to spot repair. It makes far more sense to just shoot a liner through it and call it a day. And realistically, when you look at what the price point is of epoxy lining, especially when you're talking having to crack open sidewalks, that's where the root is at, by the way. It's in the sidewalk area. Your price on lining this versus spot repairing is going to be very similar. So you might as well get the full meal deal out of it rather than just one spot. And the rest of the lines does not have a super long lifespan in it to begin with. So if repairs are not done for some reason, I would highly recommend those roots get hacked out of there properly and completely. Just keep in mind, the other thing I don't love about doing that, especially when the roots are growing to the flow line, those roots are often what are clogging the joint up and binding things together. When you go hacking the roots out of there, although you might get a nicer free-flowing flow line, you're also going to be exposing that pipe joint to the ground. And what that can cause is very rapid hydro erosion that can cause a line to settle very, very quickly. I've seen folks do that, try and buy some time to do the liner a year or two down the road. And by that point in time, because they've gone and chopped the roots out of it, I've seen lines go from perfectly graded to having 1 to 2 inches of standing water in them in a year or two. Whereas if you kind of leave the roots be, although they do run the risk of causing a blockage, it's a two-edged sword. They are sealing the joint up and keeping or helping to keep the line in grade right now. So I would just get this thing updated and realistically, I would try and line as much of that cast iron as you can too. It's, you're adding a few feet onto the repair. The cast iron's in reasonable condition. But when you're already down there, liners are far more cost effective the more length you go, because you've got the same setup fee whether you do a 2-foot section or a 40-foot section of pipe. So it behooves you to just take it, as far as you can within reason. I'm not saying go back to the very, beginning of the line under the house, which we can't scope in this case because the cleanout doesn't let us. And that's not generally my focus anyway. I mostly look at exterior piping, but if you're going to be in here lining, I would recommend taking that liner from right where the cleanout ties into the cast iron or just past it all the way out to the end of homeowner responsibility. Do the root intrusions, and I think the high likelihood that there are roots in other parts of the line here, we're just not seeing them right now. On top of that, you've got age and you've got Orangeburg pipe, which is, whether it looks great or not, is something I always recommend you fix because of the extremely high rate of failure that comes with Orangeburg. If not repaired now, I would plan to in the near future, especially if you're trying to take advantage of an epoxy liner style repair that's trenchless. The last thing I want to see you do is wait on this thing for too long and end up with a really wonky sewer line that you're not going to be able to do an epoxy liner on, or one that you're going to get a not so great result out of. Right now, if you line this thing, the line will look very nice. You might have a little bit of a kind of a lump and a bump here where the Orangeburg pipe is, but it's meaningless. There's not enough anything there to obstruct anything, and by the time you put a liner in there that's as smooth as glass, that kind of stuff has zero bearing on functionality. I recommend rescoping the line after any repairs are completed, whether you line it or do a dig style repair. If you dig the line up or do something that's semi-trenchless like a pipe burst, you want to do that rescope when the trench is closed. You want to get everything prepped for concrete, get the ground compacted, rescope it at that point, make sure all the grading looks good, and then do your concrete work. But you do need to put a load on top of the line to ensure that you're not going to have any settling problems afterwards. If you do it when the trench is open, everything you're looking at is in theory until you bury it. And you also want to rescope if you do a liner too to make sure everything cured up properly. Now, as we sit here today, because the roots, they're not impeding flow in a massive way, although they are decent size. The line is a functioning sewer line, but it is draining slower than it should due to the roots. They are going to snag debris as they come to the pipe. And I have a feeling those roots are a minimized version of what they typically look like. Again, I could be wrong, but after the amount of time I've been doing this, the amount of homes out there that have lines that are that clean is very, very low and very uncommon, especially when you've got things in the flow line that are obstructing the flow line like roots.